Yeah, my name is Ricarda Götz. Good afternoon. I'm a political scientist, normally focusing on different analysis of popular texts such as comics, movies, and my favorite topic, games. I'm employed at the city of Vienna, and today I'm happy to give a talk about empathy, inclusivity in games, and the Proteus effect. As we all know, video games have been in a constant state of evolution. From the beginning with very pixelated graphics to crystal clear high definition pictures. One example here on the page we can see is a comparison of the graphics of The Legend of Zelda from 1986 to 2017. As you can clearly see, there was a lot between there. Games have also changed in the way gamers interact with them and with their game characters. Characters that players control now have gone from simple forms to very human looking characters which have unique personalities, unique storylines, and that create an actually empathic experience for the gamers themselves. Also beloved characters like Lara Croft from Tomb Raider or BG Blazkowicz from Wolfenstein change over time, thanks to techniques, but as well as thanks to feedback from gamers. As we can see, Lara now even wears clothing when she fights evil, which is wonderful. In this talk, as opposed to the talk before me, I will focus on AAA games. AAA games, that's not an official term, but a term that is used for games with high production value and actually with high sales of games. The games I present today are mostly played on PC and consoles and feature human-looking characters. As opposed to that, I could have chosen animal characters, indie games, different ones. But as a research scientist, I have to have a research question and focus on one thing. Just to remind us, before I move on, we actually do play video games because it's really fun too. And I'm sure that especially today, there is a game out there for all of us. As I mentioned, I will talk about inclusivity in games today. But what does that actually mean? Inclusivity will mean today that games should and shall show and include representations of different identities, as well as different narratives and realities. Identity is used to describe the way individuals and groups define themselves and/or are defined by others in today's talk on the basis of gender, ethnicity, or ability. Games, and especially role-playing games, RPG in short, on which the focus lies today, present a really good opportunity to explore aspects of our own or others' identities. These games also present really good possibilities to broaden our own empathy. However, if we're looking at a lot of games, a lot of big games, we really have to ask the question, who is mainly represented as lead protagonist? Which leads to another question, can we be really anyone? Or do we play, as Agatha already mentioned, 30-something, muscular, grumpy, white heterosexual cis men? But why is that? Historically, young white men have been perceived, and with that also targeted, as the main demographic for the gaming industry. This reflects clearly what type of people are traditionally thought of as the gamer, and what kind of game characters game developers think they should be creating to satisfy these identities of these so-called typical players. With the words of Leonard, just as video games are an area about and for males, they're equally a white-centered space. And more often than not, when, for example, women or people of color were included in games, they would strongly reproduce sexist or racist stereotypes. However, target audiences and their demands change. Just to give you a little example, A recent study from Austria from 2019 shows that only in Austria, 5.3 million people play games, mostly mobile games, but still games. And that the average gamer is around 35 years old, and 46% of them are women. So it actually makes a lot of sense to make games more inclusive, because we should not forget, game developers actually want to sell their games. But do we need more inclusive games? One example, a 2019 survey conducted by Electronic Arts, one of the biggest game producers, popular games such as FIFA, Star Wars, or Battlefield, states that 56% of the more than 2,000 survey participants actually think it's really important to make games more inclusive. However, and I looked for this talk a lot at online comments, and I chose not to include them. If you read them, as you read all comments on social media, if a new game character derives from the white 30-something man, you will find the typical misogynist or racist slurs. But on the other hand, you will also find a lot of praise. Nonetheless, games have become more varied and also more inclusive. The hero and protagonist can be a strong female warrior who does not have to be saved. Male characters can actually show feelings, and avatars can have same-sex relationships or also be differently abled. The difficulty here, as I mentioned before, is not to recreate stereotypes. One very easy thing to achieve that is when people from diverse backgrounds and identities are included in the game development. Just to show you some recent examples of games. That was a hard choice for me to choose only 2 examples now. But female lead characters, rather than sexy assets or booth babes or damsels in distress, female characters like Aloy from Horizon Zero Dawn can be fighters. But also, if we think about Assassin's Creed Odyssey, one of the new ones, you can either play Cassandra or Alexios, which I found very fun. Next to binary options of character choice, gamers can also offer gender-fluid characters. The Sims, even though not my favorite game, but that's not the case here, it has offered that possibility since 2016. The Sims was also the first video game where characters were able to be in same-sex relationships. And there's a lot of proof actually that these kind of options helped a lot of players with finding their own identities and sexual orientations. Since then, fortunately, many games have offered the option of LGBTIQA characters. For example, one game that is in a lot of discussion, positive discussion now, is The Last of Us 1 and 2. Both of them, very, very high selling games, offer LGBT characters as lead protagonists. Also, game characters of color are not just racist sidekicks anymore, but lead characters. Really cool example is Clementine and AJ in The Walking Dead. But also in The Order 1886, most of the characters are from different colors or backgrounds. For me, very important, that games also show differently abled characters. For example, Lester Kress from GTA, who has an unspecified disease which gradually wears down his motor skills. He also has asthma. One of the very new games, Marvel's Avengers, there is a new hero or heroine, Cerise. She's in a wheelchair, but nonetheless has amazing powers. The different abilities of these characters do not define them, and especially not their abilities the characters have in the game. But actually, why should games be inclusive? As I mentioned, games should be mainly fun, but Game scholars like Kay and Bryce say that games are not just entertainment, but powerful tools of social integration. Also, following the material engagement theory, video games, in contrast to other media types, promote a direct involvement of the player. Inclusivity with regard to the appearance and behavior of character is also becoming more common as games take on weightier subject matters. We heard in a talk before, a game about fleeing from Syria can't just be considered fun. It takes on a weightier subject. There are different reasons for creating these sometimes called serious or empathy games. Many of these reasons are linked to the Proteus effect. The Proteus effect was developed or proposed by Yee and Bailenson. They suggest that the human embodiment in a digital avatar may influence the self-perception of the player both online and offline, based on the gaming avatar's aesthetics or behaviors. Different studies since then have analyzed how players can be influenced by their avatars. Jesse Fox et al., for example, has been studying how gaming avatars and the interactions with them influence the people's and gamers' offline attitudes. She did a lot of studies since 2009, and some of the findings I just want to present now. Some findings were that participants actually responded way better to their avatars when they were modeled more closely to their own real appearances, as opposed to generic, perfect-looking avatars. She also found out that especially women gamers may be at risk for experiencing self-objectification when their avatars wore revealing clothing. In another study, participants who were assigned a more attractive avatar, which I found pretty funny, were found to exhibit way more confidence in the real world. Another study by Konjin found that players experience similar feelings to their avatars and potentially even imitate their characters' behavior. I presented these studies to you, but I still want to add my critique, because game studies as well as popular cultural studies is something that always has to be critiqued, because they're actually also additive artifacts for entertainment. So my critique is that, for example, Konjin only looked at adolescent boys in his studies. Fox focuses a lot of first-person shooters and games. And yeah, most of the studies actually have quite a limited scope and only look at human-looking avatars. So for me and my personal research or experiences, the extent of the Proteus effect also strongly depends on the player's involvement in games. How much do they play? How long have they been playing? And what other indicators make up their social and personal life? Future studies, and I would love to do one of those, need to clarify the extent on these effects and as well, hopefully show how avatars can actually elicit positive changes in attitudes and self-image. So why do we create games that elicit empathy? Why do we create these serious games when games should be entertainment? Borazeri and Pitt say that these serious games create environments where features such as thought-provoking, informative, or stimulating are as important as the fun. Games with more serious content can actually be used for empowering different groups and communities. Games can use to function for teaching or raising awareness, which we will see today. They are also enable users to develop new expertise and capabilities, very closely following Bourdieu's The Theory of Cultural Capital. But they might also show users the consequences of their choices and behaviors. One example that was already mentioned before in detail, which I find funny that I included it in my presentation now, is Hellblade Sacrifice. We heard that it raises empathy and also an experience about mental illness. The game, despite being a formidable RPG with great fighting possibilities, is really just designed to provide this experience on mental health that maybe we never had. And, which I like, the female protagonist Senua is a woman and a super strong warrior. She wears clothing, which I like as well. And she struggles with her mental health, which we can hear with the constant, yes, sometimes annoying voice, which she calls the darkness. Which is interesting about the game, what I mentioned before, is the game was very closely designed with neuroscientists, mental health specialists, and people who experience psychotic symptoms, which makes it, first of all, really relatable and quite real. So my conclusion of today's talk follows a quote by Fernandez Vara, who says that rather than limiting ourselves to thinking about games as a medium to just convey messages, we can think about games as artifacts that encode certain values, which players decode and engage with as they play. We have come super far with games, as I showed you in the beginning. Games embody different experience and should depict a variety of identities and realities. So I hope the future will bring only more, so don't stop playing. Thank you for listening. I think I don't have time for questions. I will choose the lounge 8, because I like the number 8, to answer any possible questions. Thank you for listening.